to As Above, So Below Tarot. Today we're going to be looking at the Fool card in the Major Arcana as a way of jumping into our series on the Fool's Journey. Now what I'm trying to do with this series is generate a story of creation in its most basic sense. We're going to be looking at the psychological foundations of some of these cards, as well as the spiritual foundations of some of the cards. Hopefully all of the cards, but as with many things of this nature, it's easy to get stuck. So we're gonna just take it as slowly as we can without making it super boring. So the Fool is one of the most famous cards in the tarot deck, evidenced by the fact that the Joker in playing card decks is the only trump that actually made it from tarot into your basic playing cards. Now the reason this is because the Joker and the Fool just mean so little without looking at them in terms of a bigger picture. So placing the Fool in the Fool's Journey of the Major Arcana actually gives way to a lot of the secrets embedded in tarot. So the Fool's Journey is what takes us from inception to creation, or inception to manifestation, or from nothingness to everything. So starting with the Fool is very important. Now, the Fool is the impossible nothing, which is to say it's impossible for there to be nothing. And because of this, the Fool's zero can be seen as sort of the millisecond of silence before creation explodes into being. On the same token, on a human level, the Fool can be appropriately compared to the second of silence before a major event takes place. So the moment before getting T-boned on the highway, calm before the storm, maybe the few seconds of silence waiting for a pregnancy test to read positive or negative, changing your life forever. So inherent to the Fool is a formless chaos bursting forth with unpredictability. So he's the great egg, and then contained within his zero, is all possibility. The Fool is depicted in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck as a young man or woman, it's kind of a genderless being, about to take a step off of a cliff. The Thoth version of this card gives us a crazed green man jumping into a vortex. Now, these are basically the same things. They represent to divinators the beginning of a journey or the possibility of new opportunities whose outcomes can't be predicted or might be predicted by surrounding cards in the reading. But if we meditate on the archetypal significance of the Fool, it can expand its meaning and it gives it an application beyond just the mundane. And we can look at examples of that further on. So reading into the human aspect of the card, the Fool's depictions in traditional systems remind us that fear is of no consequence to the bursting forth of potential, while at the same time showing us that fear is basically something that's going to demand our attention and is going to always be present. So Crowley's depiction shows a tiger here, basically just taking a chunk out of the subject's leg. The Fool in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is, of course, jumping off of a cliff. His little canine pal is trying to get his attention and tell him that he's about to jump off of a cliff. But the Fool is the meta will to act and let the chips fall where they may. So to fully appreciate this, you have to consider the gravity of all possible experience available to a human being. We, of course, have joy, pleasure, love, success, as well as suffering, brutality, hatred, and loss. But, come what may, the human experience is something that is intrinsically valuable. Faith in one's ability to navigate anomalous events is the antidote to fear. And then letting fear go enables us to act in the moment. And then acting in the moment enables us to learn from our actions. So if we do this in whatever domain we act, we become more capable and we can increase our capacity for creative problem solving. So to touch on something a little more abstract and to look at something I don't really see a lot when people write or speak about the Fool. Now, we can look at the Fool's journey from a 0 to 22 perspective. That's going through each major Arcana card in order from 0 to 21. Not 22, sorry. Now in this we find the pathway to manifestation. But if we reverse our thinking with the major Arcana, we find ourselves on the pathway to liberation. So the tarot could be used as a stepladder to reach the Fool. The Fool being the everything that is altogether itself. It's not separate from anything because it's literally everything all at once. It's time, it's matter, it's space. Because the Fool is the thing which precedes this. And we can say pretty confidently, just based on that supposition, that given that the Fool is that which precedes creation, the Fool is representative of that which gives way to creation, or that from which creation actually bursts. So Crowley calls the Fool's 0 the egg, and I think that's about right. Anyway, it's a valuable perspective to use when looking at the tarot. So what we can do is we can look at the tarot, or at least the major arcana, as a pathway to liberation. So from there, we could say maybe not necessarily a pathway to liberation then, but a pathway to enlightenment. So as the 0, the Fool sort of begs us to understand and appreciate something that's nearly impossible, which is complete and utter detachment from this manifested and material being. Now, a lot of people know about the word enlightenment, but I think to the Western thinker, or at least to most Western thinkers, these terms mean very little outside of the typical portrayals in media and art. However, detachment from material being can be achieved through meditation, psychedelic chemicals, or a combination of the two. Enlightenment is basically this state of consciousness that occurs when all the layers and processes that make up our humanity are stripped away. So our 5 senses, our sense of time, our sense of soul, our emotional connection to ourselves, our identity, they're all left behind in this state. All these things stripped away, you basically come face to face with what you actually are. And in these states, you realize that you are just the thing that experiences. If you have none of you, but you're still conscious, which is basically what this is. Enlightenment is just your consciousness leaving everything else behind. But as embedded as we are in this plane of existence, achieving states of consciousness that allow us to experience this detachment have to be attained through hard work or forced chemically. It should be noted that psychedelic chemicals, while very interesting, very novel, and very useful, under certain circumstances, they are blunt instruments for achieving enlightenment or achieving mystical states. Blunt instruments. There's no... For the layman, there's no way to tell where you're going to end up if you try like a hero's journey on whatever the dosage amount is on either LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, or DMT. But what you see in these experiences ultimately changes you forever. So it's recommended that the seeker of this experience probably work with a teacher or a guru. You can meet people online. You can meet people through metaphysical shops in your local area. If you find meditation classes, there are places to look for people who will ultimately want to help you reach this state. Because once you reach it, you feel compelled to help others reach it. Because what you feel in this state is basically the ultimate contact with truth. And the truth is, as well as I can describe it, we are not actually separate from anything in our known reality, and the duality, time, matter, and physical restriction are illusions. So the Fool represents the source of this illusion, removed from us to such a degree that it is impossible to fully imagine without transcendental experiences. So now that we've covered sort of my beliefs on the Fool and why I think the card is important to the overall scheme of tarot, I want to look at some of my favorite examples of this card, starting with the Tarot De Marseilles from the CBD Tarot by Dr. Yoav Ben Dov. I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name. I've only ever read it, so you'll have to forgive me for that. Now, this is of course a pretty classic rendition of the Fool. In fact, a lot of the similarities between the major arcana in the Tarot De Marseilles and the Rider-Waite-Smith deck they're uncanny. So here we have the Fool walking, but not necessarily off of a cliff, but he's definitely going somewhere, and he's got a companion telling him, hey, you better watch out. But, Fool doesn't care. So that's Le Mat. He's just a walking. Now, what's great about Tarot De Marseilles is it gives you very little to work with in terms of esoteric symbolism. But something that I notice and appreciate about the Fool in Tarot De Marseilles is he is walking sort of, from left to right, which is always a sign of forward movement. So it makes sense. The Fool's on his journey. Now the next variation I have here is the Haindl Tarot Fool, which is a really interesting depiction of the story of Parsifal. Now here we have sort of a forlorn Parsifal putting his finger over the wound of a sacred bird. Now this legend basically starts with him in his innocence killing something sacred, killing a sacred animal, destroying something very important, and that starts him on a pathway to becoming a very powerful hero. So that's an interesting rendition. Now, moving on, we have the Fool from the Navigator's Tarot of the Mystic Sea by Julia Turk. Now, this card is great. As you can see, we have a yellow fool figure surfing through space on just waves that look a lot, like spiraling, like DNA almost. Just above him is a bird, looks like a parrot. And we have the blue man here. Now, I really honestly I'm not really sure what a lot of these symbols mean. But we do have an orca. So he's surfing through space with an orca, which is great. I mean, that's great. Julia Turk's deck, Navigator's Tarot of the Mystic Sea, takes the Fool's Journey in a reverse perspective. So she focuses on the pathway to liberation and not necessarily the pathway to manifestation in her tarot, which is a crucial service. This is not a very well-known deck, at least not in current, just the tarot community online, but it's great. And we'll talk more about it in the future. It is the card backs could use some updating, but the card stock is amazing, and the artwork is amazing. I mean, look at this magician. You'll see this card soon. So too with this. These cards are amazing. It's one of the coolest decks I own. Actually, it's one of the only decks that I own just because it's cool, but then I ended up finding a lot of value in it. Just I didn't see a lot of people had it, and the artwork was psychedelic enough to get my attention, which sort of takes us actually to the final Fool that we're going to talk about in this segment, which is the Fool in M.M. Maline's Tabula Mundi. Now, this tarot deck, oh my god, this deck is so amazing. This is, well, first off, let's look at the card backs. Now, I know probably a lot of people focus too heavily on the aesthetic choices made by artists in the tarot community and in tarot at large, but M.M. Maline is a genius. She's a genius. This is her second tarot deck. She's currently working on her third. And I'm not necessarily one to support artists for the sake of supporting artists, but I will definitely be buying the next deck she comes out with, because I took a chance on this one, didn't do a whole lot of research, paid somewhere around $60 for it, and it blows me away every day. Now, this is a great example of the Fool. So we have the Fool is jumping into a vortex. He's surrounded by a coiling snake. We have the crocodile, which is representative of fertility. So to save you some time, I mean, you should do a little more research on this, but just a quick run through. The crocodile at the bottom of the Fool, and this one as well, is representative of fertility because the ancient Egyptians thought that crocodiles couldn't reproduce, so therefore they represented fertility. I don't know, there was an inversion there, and the Egyptians in their ultimate wisdom, and I don't mean that sarcastically, saw the crocodile as something way, way, way significant. Now, we have a tiger here. This is a little bit different from our canine friend at the heels of the Fool in the Rider-Waite-Smith rendition and the Tarot De Marseilles rendition of the Fool. This is a tiger leaping towards a man. Tigers are the most terrifying animals. In my opinion, tigers are the most terrifying animals on planet Earth. But the Fool, again, doesn't care. Again, fear is of no consequence to the bursting forth of potential. Okay. If I have any of this wrong, let me know. I want to hear from you. Peace out.